this particular issue is around Russian ability to be able to manipulate information which affects our confidence in our democratic systems. And that's much harder to defend from technically. Because, of course, what they're doing is they're playing with the human mind. They're not playing around with our technical systems per se.
The Foreign Office have said hundreds of MPs, civil servants and other public figures have been hacked by the Russian security service, and their private conversations are among the compromised material. The Russian Federal Security Service, it's also known as the FSB, is accused of having orchestrated a massive hacking campaign since 2015, targeting personal email accounts and stealing private information. Well, how bad has this got? Well, Brian Lord, former Deputy Director at GCHQ. He's now Managing Director of cybersecurity company PGI. Hello, Brian.
Hello, how are you?
I'm healthy, and it's really good to have you on the show tonight. I mean, we have heard this before, the Russian state, that it can get anywhere it likes. How alarmed are you by this latest information?
I think alarmed would be probably quite strong. I think sort of sadly accepting is probably more the position I'm in. I mean, I think this is a long-standing campaign. The organisation like the FSB are patient. They take a long time doing these things. And as you said, this has been going on since 2015. The type of technique they use takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to be successful, and they have garnered a lot of information which they can then put to effect in any number of different ways. I think it's simply symptomatic of our dependence on digital technology and targeting a lot of people who use digital technology in their normal life and exposing vulnerabilities of it. So I think we should be cautiously concerned, but I don't think we should necessarily panic too much, but just be aware of what's going on.
Brian, the Foreign Office say Russian hacking and disinformation are a threat to next year's general election. How might these hackers try and move the dial?
Well, I mean, that's a very good point. And I think quite often debate about things like, cybersecurity, hacking, disinformation, and so on, can sometimes generate the opinion that there's going to be one sort of big, major, game-changing event. And it's not. It's a kind of systemic, relentless drip, drip, drip of undermining individuals' views of what is real, what is not, and eroding confidence in our democratic institutions and systems. So, for example, if they have as much data as the National Cybersecurity Centre, and bear in mind, of course, as well, that the US have carried out the same activity today as well, because we have to bear in mind there is an American election next year as well as probably a UK election as well. And what this means is they can just gradually, carefully release information with a distorting narrative through a complex network of various social media platforms, online platforms, to just start dripping people's confidence in what they are reading. Is it true? What are our politicians saying? Are they trustworthy? Which, of course, is the Russian kind of nihilistic end state, which is to just generally create confusion around democratic principles that we all rely on. And it's a very smart technique. They're very good at it, but it's never a one-off event.
So it's a subtle twisting of the news, if you like.
Yes, indeed.
The National Cyber Security Centre. Now, let's talk about what they do. They're going to release a cybersecurity advisory, which essentially is how we defend against these attacks.
Yep.
So what is that advice, and how will it help us spot what the attacks look like?
Well, so I think it's already been issued. It was issued today. It's a very good piece of advice, and I think within this context, I think what they're saying is the approach the FSB used, using the sort of wonderful terminology of Star Blizzard or whatever name they're giving it these days, is they target senior people, relatively important people, in this case members of Parliament, House of Lords, senior civil servants. And they conduct what's called a spear phishing campaign, which is not what is generally phishing, which is kind of a blanket campaign against loads of people. This is gaining the trust of individuals in order to develop a relationship with them, so they then eventually download malware onto their computers, and then they can extract information. Now, that is the ability of collecting the information. It's how they then use it. Now, the National Cybersecurity Advisory only, of course, covers advice to people about how to protect themselves from having that information stolen. To my mind, the biggest risk to our democratic principles, if you like, is not, well, obviously stealing the information is bad enough. It's how that information is used and then promulgated to the entire population. And so I think all the techniques that are used, which is all about sensible advice, which is, don't reuse your passwords. It's ensuring that you're very, very sure about who you're getting emails from, and applying corporate protection to the type of systems that you use. That's good advice. But the other advice is to the general public, which is when lots of information flows out onto social media, onto platforms around this is what this MP said, this is what this group of MPs said, this is what the British government is doing, this is what the opposition are doing, is to always be very careful about what the source of that information is, because it could be a fairly complicated disinformation campaign.
In real kind of terms that we're going to feel as end users of all this cybersecurity, we hear Russia's trying to get into our elections, they're trying to manipulate the news. Is it going to be things like two-factor verification for logons onto banks, onto our personal email? So actually, we're all going to feel a little bit of this as an end result.
Well, we are. I mean, but I think if we're looking at things like two-factor authentication, that's not just around sort of Russian ability to try and manipulate our elections, which is what this advisory is about. That's good security. That's good security procedures in our normal day-to-day life, whether we're online shopping, whether we're dealing with our banks, whether we're dealing with anything else. So things like two-factor authentication and all the capabilities that our vendors come out with are very important for people to use, people to adopt, and in order to protect our own information. But that is just generic good cybersecurity advice. This particular issue is around Russian ability to be able to manipulate information which affects our confidence in our democratic systems. And that's much harder to defend from technically, because, of course, what they're doing is they're playing with the human mind. They're not playing around with our technical systems per se.
We're really tight for time, Brian, but of course, deep fakes, something many in the public would have known very little about up until maybe 6 months ago. Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, was affected by one recently. Just very briefly, this is the type of stuff that people are also worried about when it comes to tricking people into news they think is real when it's not.
And I think that's absolutely true, is the ability to be able to manipulate information and create fake information out of nothing. Once again is exploiting our reliance upon different digital information sources. Now, I think the issue about that is we have to continue as digesters of that information to be wary about where this information comes, how it has been verified, how it has been validated. And always be reasonably skeptical about things that look sensational and are great, but actually under scrutiny may well not actually be what they appear.
Brian, always good to get your expertise. Thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. Have a good evening.
Brian Lord, the former Deputy Director of GCHQ, now Managing Director of the cybersecurity company PGI, there on that warning from the Foreign Office tonight.